Let's go back to our presentation and see what the next step is. One of the first topics to become familiar with is the topic of privilege and whether or not you're even allowed to use scripts in PowerShell. The default for most of the machines that will be in this classroom will be that PowerShell scripting is disabled by default. Turning it on will require you to issue a command to enable that, and enabling that requires administrator privilege. Most of you will have created your Windows login to have administrator privilege, and as a result will expect that if you simply start PowerShell, you can run commands that require administrative privilege. PowerShell has an extra safety feature in it, in that even if you log on to Windows as administrator, when you start PowerShell, it does not have administrator privilege. To get administrator privilege in PowerShell, you must use the Run as Administrator selection on the menu from the icon that starts PowerShell. That is regardless of whatever login you use to log in to Windows. So we're talking about when you right-click on the PowerShell icon and you have a choice to Run as Administrator. So let's go ahead and start up our PowerShell. Let's see what happens when we don't have privilege and what error messages look like in PowerShell, because they're quite different from Bash. And let's then eliminate the problem using Run as. So start up your PowerShell. You probably already have one running. You'll notice in the name stripe across the top, it shows Windows PowerShell. Your prompt will say PS for PowerShell, and the name of the drive and folder you are currently in, which will be your home folder, and it's waiting for commands to be typed. Let's try the command from the slide. Get ACL :\*. We're getting the access control lists. In other words, the security privileges for all of the files in the C folder. As a matter of fact, it's actually going to be the C folder subfolder Windows. The reason we're going to do that one is because there will be files in there that require administrator privilege to access, so we expect to have something fail. Pressing enter will start the command running. It'll print out some output, and then you'll get some output in red text, and you'll see the word error in there, an exception, and so on. It's fairly clearly obvious the red message is some kind of a problem, and the white output is not. So this brings up a really important thing to remember about PowerShell and how it's working on things. PowerShell works with objects. Each line of output here represents some object it worked on and produced output for. Each line here actually is related to a file inside the C Windows folder that we've asked for the access control list on. Something to think about that is not necessarily obvious is that means this command ran and did its work on each of these files and objects before it encountered one that it couldn't access and got an error. This means that any command you do in PowerShell may well make changes to the system, if it's a command that makes changes, and affect multiple objects in the system before encountering something it can't deal with and then failing, not processing the rest of the objects it was supposed to work with, because once it hits this red error message, it says, I can't proceed, and it immediately terminates. There may well have been all kinds of other files in that directory or that folder that we had access to get onto and see the access control list for, but it did not even try them, because once it encountered the error, the default thing it does is stop. So errors are large in red text. They're really easy to spot. The first line is a general description of the problem, and in this case, attempted to perform an unauthorized operation. In other words, we didn't have privilege to do this. It says the error happened in the get ACL command at line 1, character 1. And the command was get ACL C : Windows star. Well, there is only line 1. It was only one command. It's a one-line script we basically ran by typing the command in. Character 1 says there isn't a specific character on the line that gave us trouble. The command simply failed. Then there's some detailed information for the error. Unauthorized access exception. This means that we tried to do something that we didn't have permission for. Let's solve this problem. This is a simple permissions problem that we can solve by actually getting our administrator privilege to apply. The account I logged into Windows as actually has administrator privilege, but because I didn't choose Run As when I started PowerShell, it's not applying that privilege and doesn't have the permission of administrator for the commands it runs. So let's start another window using the Run As capability. And when this one starts up, we'll get asked, are you sure? You'll notice the top stripe is different between the two. The new one says Administrator Windows PowerShell, and the prompt says PS for PowerShell, but we're not in the user's home folder anymore. We're in C Windows System 32. So when you run as administrator, always remember, you are not starting in your home folder anymore. You're starting in C Windows System 32, no matter what user you're logged into Windows with. So when you do commands, if you don't tell it what folder to work in, it's going to work in the System 32 folder. Let's go ahead and try our command again, the exact same command, get ACL C Windows System 32. Windows star actually we were doing. And you'll notice the list goes further this time. We don't have a problem with red text partway through. If we find where the last one failed right after INF, you'll see here the file it had an issue with was called infused apps, and over here it is restricted, and that's why it failed. We had to have permission to access that. So that's run as administrator, and that gives us the administrator privilege for things that we do. Always look at the Windows frame to see if you have that administrator privilege applied. The next video will continue for the next slide.